Hello, everybody. My name is Tatiana Speed, and I am here co-hosting the Visionaries Room at the UpConvergence Global Summit. And today I have the great pleasure and honor of interviewing Dr. Desmond Berghofer. And Desmond is the president of Creative Learning International, the chairman of the International Foundation of Learning, and co-founder of the Institute for Ethical Leadership. He is also the author of a remarkable book called The Visioneers, a courage story about belief in the future. And don't we need that right about now? So we are going to be diving into this book. And first, a little bit about it. It was written 30 years ago and was way ahead of its time. But the message is more relevant now than ever before. And so Dr. Desmond Berghofer and his wife and partner, Dr. Geraldine Schwartz, have actually relaunched the book along with co-founding an organization and global platform called the Visioneers International Network, which was inspired by the vision and dream presented in this book. So if you want to know more about the network and the platform, listen to my interview with Dr. Jerry Schwartz, which I will link in the chat below. But today we're going to do something very special. We're going to dive into the book and the philosophy of the book itself. And Desmond is going to both lay out the background around why he wrote it and what inspired him, and also read to us and really bring it to life, read to us some of the passages from the book. So let's begin. Welcome, Desmond. So wonderful to have you here. And to start us off, I'd love for you to tell us what the book is about and why this story is so relevant right now.
Okay, well, let me go back 30 years to 1990. I was 52 years old and had just left a busy professional life in educational administration with the government of Alberta in Canada. And I had been intellectually aware for more than 25 years of the reasons for concern about the future of humanity. In fact, I'd written about it in my PhD thesis in 1972. Growing evidence of environmental degradation, problems of inequality, a human ecological footprint that was exceeding the carrying capacity of the planet, and so on. Well, free from my responsibilities in the bureaucracy, I asked myself what I could do to address these concerns that were only getting worse with every passing year. And it seemed to me that humanity needed a new story, one that could describe a better future than the one that we were surely going to get. And writing it as fiction, well, I decided to write it as a novel that would describe how humanity moved forward into this better world and away from its current predicament. And writing it as fiction gave me the freedom to create the events and to create the characters. I'd been a student of English literature in my early years at university in Australia, so I knew about the great novelists, and I fashioned my book on their model, with a grand vision of action with the whole world as the setting. The story is about a very big idea that a small group of people, I call them the Visioneers, could act together strategically to change the dominant mindset of humanity, away from ideas of conflict and separation toward the belief in cooperation and unity for the benefit of all. I created a plot that played out on the world stage. It included villains and heroes and heroines. I put a vibrant love story right at the center, and I wove in moments of tragedy and grief, and ended with a triumphal celebration where the whole world came together around the ideas of the Visioneers and inspired by their courage and determination to never give up. It was a grand dream, fueled by my imagination, but written with the belief that all this was possible. What I didn't know at the time is that it would take another 25 years before something like this could happen in the real world. And that brings me to the point about why this is now relevant in the world today.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's relevant because the problems haven't gone away. They've just gotten worse. And we are now hearing repeatedly from the United Nations about the closing window for taking action on the environmental issues. We're besieged with concerns about rising inequality, all the things I mentioned before, just getting worse. And when my wife, Geraldine, and I looked at this a couple of years ago, we said, the ideas in this book are relevant to this time, and we have to take it out of the closet and bring it back. So that's what we've done.
I'm so glad, and we're very glad for it, because it's so true. Reading this book, I've just been so touched and inspired and strengthened, actually, because the situations presented in the book do seem so dire, and yet the characters truly rise to the circumstances and transform not only themselves but the world. So it's a very inspiring story. One thing that I think would be worth clarifying is that you see a distinction between the word visioneer and visionary. And I think when I first heard the word visioneer, I thought it was sort of a fancy way of saying visionary. But for you, there's a difference. So I'd love for you to share with us what that is.
Well, a visionary is someone who has a very broad grasp of the future in a positive way, that they can really understand the dynamics. Mm-hmm. That's a visionary. And they have ideas about what we should be doing. A visioneer is like that, but is focused on doing something specific to make a difference, to acting. I call it a pioneer of the future. The pioneers of old are the ones who created our civilization out of the wilderness by the toil of their hands and the imagination of their minds. Well, visioneers are pioneers of the future in that they can see what needs to be done, and they go ahead and make their own contribution in their own way. And if you get enough of them, of course, you get a massive change. And that's the whole idea.
Okay, very cool. So I think we should dive into the book now. And the book is, there's some very pivotal scenes where the characters, your main characters, give some very unforgettable and powerful speeches. And one of the speeches that for me was very impactful was the speech that Father Louis Valdez gives quite early on. And for me, I felt like it really laid the groundwork for what the book was going to be about and sort of the overarching message. And I'm not sure if you would agree with that, but I would love for you to read to us from this very pivotal speech by Father Louis Valdez, and also to set the context for why this speech was being given and what was happening at that moment.
Yeah, okay. I should explain that Louis Valdez is one of the Visioneers, mm-hmm. and he is a priest, Roman Catholic Church, and he partners up with another one of the Visioneers, George Cardinal, who we might talk about later, who is an indigenous chief. And the whole idea of the Visioneers is that each one does what they can do. And Louis decided that what he could do, pretty ambitious, was to put up a message to the world by satellite television. And he was doing this out of his remote location in the mountains in Chile. And he actually makes 3 broadcasts. The first one is kind of iffy and dodgy because he's just getting his technology ready. And then he does a second one where he's getting subtitles and all that kind of thing because he's speaking in Spanish, but has translated into English. And in the third one, he is delivering his core message to the world, and is aware that this is probably his last shot because there's evidence that the authorities are going to come in and shut him down. So that's the background. So here we have Father Louis Valdez in his kind of primitive television studio in the Mission in San Diego, supported by his friend George Cardinal and a couple of technicians. And he's coming to the end of his broadcast when he kind of summarizes things. And this is what he says. My friends, the world is about to transform to a new age of enlightenment, gathering together around the powerful visions for good that lie in the hearts of the overwhelming majority of human beings on the planet. Those visions will now come forward and wash over the ugly, scarred remnants of a violent past, which we will not accept as the future. We are taking the future into our hands. We are enlivening our minds with visions of the possible. We are taking away the power from those who too long have held us back from all that we can be. Tomorrow, I ask you to go out and form yourselves into bands of visioneers. Put up your dreams, talk to each other and listen. Listen deeply to the wisdom of your collective minds at work, building something strong and rich and beautiful for all. This is our heritage. This is the nobility of our human spirit. This is the time of new and wonderful beginnings. And that's the end of his message. I don't want to give.
Are you going to share what happens next? Okay.
He's cut short by a tragic event, which you'll, if you read the book, you'll find out what it was. But that's the core of his message about human nobility and visions of the possible that can change the world.
Yeah, it's a very powerful speech, and it's a theme, this visions of what's possible in the world, and using the creative power of the mind is a theme you weave throughout the novel. And that seems to be his real charge to us, is to harness that creative force within each human. And I'd love for you to speak to that, because you say the words creative learning and creative power of the mind in numerous kind of ways throughout the book. And I wonder if you can elaborate on what you meant by that.
Yes, well, there are, I think, kinds of learning. One we might call adaptive learning, which is based on the acquisition of facts and accepted beliefs. And the other is creative learning, which is where the compelling force is anticipation, fueled by imagination. The second kind of learning, creative learning, is unique to the human being, where we can cast our minds forward to focus on the things that need to be done in order to make things better. And this is the power of foresight. First, to see in advance, to anticipate what will happen if things continue to go on the way they are. And second, to create through imagination an alternative future so that things can be better. That's the difference between learning by shock and learning by foresight. And the world is very familiar with learning by shock, where we suddenly find ourselves in the midst of a difficult problem. Think of COVID-19, for example, global pandemic. That could have been avoided if we had cast our minds forward and anticipated the problem and put in place measures that would have prevented the problem from ever happening. That's the difference between learning by foresight and learning by shock. The difference between creative learning and adaptive learning. So what I'm talking about in the book is getting the world focused on creative learning and using the creative power of imagination to create a better future rather than just let things happen.
Yeah, and I mean, in the book, it definitely pays off because the characters manage to dramatically alter the course of events and change the world, in fact. So I felt reading your book that harnessing the creative power of the mind in my own life would be a very powerful way to proceed.
Well, I wanted to encourage the reader to think that way, you know, to say,
right.
Yeah, yes, we can do this. Yes, yes.
Yeah, no, there's such a roaring empowerment in this book. It's like you cannot hold on to your own feelings of hopelessness and despair reading this book. There's just such a charge of strength and possibility. So, and that kind of leads us into my next question, or not even really a question, but there's a part in the book where you really kind of bring the idea of Visioneers acting together and of the power of that. And that is on, I think it's on page 188. And to me, that is a really important section to highlight because it really shows the vision out of which you're building this new platform and organization. So first I want you to read it, and then I'd love for you to share with us a little bit more about how this vision in the book has led into the platform you're now building with your partner.
Okay, I'll be happy to do that. I forgot to show the book the first time.
Oh yeah, very important.
There it is.
Yeah.
Big thick book, you see.
Very big thick book.
All right, well, what's going on here is that the leader of the Visioneers, whose name is Mark Venture, is trying to elicit the participation and cooperation of the United Nations. He knows that the Visioneers themselves can do so much, but they need at some point to get the governments of the world involved. And the strategy is to use the United Nations to do that. Mm-hmm. And in this particular part of the book, he's talking to a senior official at the United Nations named Peter Hemphill. And Peter is sort of quizzing him and saying, you know, what's all this Visioneer stuff? Mm-hmm. Tell me about it. And so Mark is replying, and he says, the Visioneers are acting. They're out in the world. They're grabbing attention. They're pulling up the blinds. They're throwing open the windows. Today, we're a curiosity. Tomorrow, we'll be a force so strong that the El Condors of the world will tremble in their ears for fear of it. That's a reference to the chief villain in the book, who is responsible for striking out against some of the Visioneers.
Mm-hmm.
We're empowering people to work together, to find what needs to be done, to learn what they need to know, and do what they need to do. And the key to it all is shared vision. Millions of people around the world overcoming barriers of language and culture and economic differences to build a vision in which each of them can see something for themselves that they prefer, something better than they or their children will otherwise have. We need models, lighthouses, beacons, and we need them quickly. The United Nations, Peter, can be an organization that will nourish the flowering. With its member agencies, it can be a powerful, proactive force for the future. The Visioneers are out to make a difference, and I'm here to ask you to come on board, to do whatever you can to nourish the enterprise.
Hurrah!
That's the pitch.
That's a pretty good pitch. It's a pretty good pitch.
Later on in the book, he actually gets to talk to all of the leaders of the world at a special session of the United Nations in the General Assembly. And that's when he spells it all out.
Spells it all out, yeah.
And guess what? They come on board.
Amazing.
Support the Visioneers.
Amazing. So
we're on our way to the United Nations now with our project.
And we actually are in real time.
Yeah, we're on the edge of it right now.
Yeah. So something I've heard you say before is that the Visioneers you're currently connecting with through the network and platform you're building are the Visioneers of your imagination. And I don't actually know exactly what you mean by that, but it's always kind of like struck me when I've heard you say that as something quite beautiful and profound. So I'd love for you to share with us exactly what you mean by that.
What exactly is the question?
Well, the question is, how are the Visioneers currently populating your network, the Visioneers of your imagination?
Or how we're populating the network in reality?
Yes, in reality.
Yeah, well, what we've done, and the chief engineer of all of this is my wife, Geraldine Schwartz, whom you've interviewed, and she's spoken about this. What we have done is create the Visioneers International Network. And we are populating it, as you say, with Visioneers. And the question is, how are we doing that? Well, we don't have any preconceived plan. We began by identifying a few people whom we knew to be Visioneers because of their beliefs and values. Then we asked them to invite and nominate others like themselves to become part of the network and to have their work showcased on a virtual exposition, which was Jerry's idea for the way that we can show the world what the Visioneers are doing. See, my insight is that since I wrote the book 30 years ago, the kind of thing I talked about hasn't really happened in the world. But what has happened is that there have been millions of people all over the world doing things that Visioneers would do. And so I'm saying these people are the Visioneers of my imagination, but we don't know about them. Or if we do know about them, we don't know enough about them, and they don't know about each other. So the idea of the network was to find these people and get them connected to each other and showcase them to the world. And so we're doing it in this sort of organic way. And what we're finding as we proceed is that the evolutionary energy of the universe is kicking in, and that the right people show up just at the right time. We're finding ourselves being connected to the most incredible people who are connecting us to others whom we just wouldn't have known about if they hadn't done that. Our job is to put up all of this on our platform for the whole world to see, and to make this web of good work a major topic of discourse in the mainstream media and in the communities and in our political parties, to have them talking about the good work that the Visioneers are doing and how that is the model for the future, rather than talk about all of the bad news of violence and conflict and dysfunctionality. So that's how we're doing it. It's a very organic process, but I do firmly believe that it's now being driven by creative energy in the universe itself.
Certainly is. There's
I
so
think
many
it was
visions.
Goethe who said that once you begin to act, something happens to
All the universe conspires in your favor. Yeah. Once you commit completely, then all the world conspires to help you fulfill on your commitment. That's not. Yeah, it's not the exact quote, but that was the basic.
Well, here it is. Here it is in action.
Yeah. Wonderful. So another theme you touch on in the book is the existence of evil and the fact that it needs to be dealt with. And this is really touched on, I don't want to give too much away in the book, but following the tragic incident where there's a death of someone very dear, and George Cardinal, one of the characters, at the funeral gives a speech where he's kind of, sharing his heartbreak, but also how he's not going to let that heartbreak take him down into a space of hopelessness and despair, but actually how he's going to overcome it and continue serving and striving for the good in the world. And I think that section's particularly pertinent right now, given what the world is going through. And so I'd love for you to read us that section from George Cardinal.
All right, well, the background here is the person who he is grieving is Louis Valdez, who we heard from before, tragically killed. And Louis, being an indigenous person, is feeling desolate. He doesn't really understand how this could have happened. And there's a memorial service being held for Louis Valdez by the church. And at the end of it, George has the opportunity to speak to the thousands of people who have come out. Everybody was amazed at all these people coming out to this memorial service for a man they didn't know, but whom they'd heard broadcasting to the world. And so George talks about himself and Louis and how he's been feeling. And he says, "And my brother Louis would speak to me of his God and of the life and work of his Lord Jesus. And I would speak to him of my God, whose breath is in the wind and is in the wind of the forest, and whose kiss is in the touch of the morning mist on the face. And we would know that his God and my God were the same. And as we sat there in the sunshine, we would know that our God was connected to us in the land, and that we were connected to him and to all people everywhere. For everything is connected to everything else." And we couldn't understand why, just a few kilometers away, men who were connected to God were destroying the forests, which were also connected to God and to the men. And we couldn't understand why the men would be destroying themselves. We thought it must be because a terrible sickness had come upon men which had stolen away their minds. And we wondered how all over the world people could be doing such things. We could hear the earth crying out in pain. And Louis, God said to him, "You must speak out against such wickedness and touch the minds of men and women who have not yet fallen fully under the curse of such sickness." And my God, speaking through the mountains and the eagles that soar among them, said, "Yes, you must speak out against this, because my God was also his God, and he is also your God, and we must all speak out against such evil." But then the evil came striking back savagely against us and took away the life of my brother, even while he was speaking out to save the earth. And I didn't understand that such a thing could happen. And I did not protect my brother from it. And now he is gone. But I am still here, and I have been asking myself, what do I do now? And the answer was not coming until today, until I saw all of you here, and I knew that you would not be here if the evil was in your hearts. And if so many of you are gathered here in this one place, how many more of our brothers and sisters are out there in the world seeing us and listening to our words and joining in our sorrow? How many more out there will be ready to gather like you and take strength from each other to act against the great evil that has settled over our world? I don't know how many, my friends, but I think it must be like the leaves of the forests or the grains of sand on the beach. I think it must be a very great number. And I think they must be learning from each other, and together they will build visions of what the world can be like again in the future. And from their visions, they will act to make the world be like that.
Hmm.
So George gets his strength back and goes on to do amazing things.
Mm-hmm. Gorgeous. So I have one last section that I think would be very powerful for you to read. The book culminates in an event called the Congress of the Global Mind. And the world is brought together in this moment in a path, is brought together, and the path of humanity is really, really changed. The trajectory is completely changed for the good. And I'd love for you to share with us what this Congress of the Global Mind means to you, because I understand you're creating one in real life. So I'd love for you to share about that, and maybe if there's a quote from the book that you feel really would bring that to life for us.
Well, I think what I'd like to say about this is that this idea of the Congress of the Global Mind was introduced very early in the book. It actually takes place right at the end of the book, but it was introduced very early. And the person who introduces it is one of the mentors that I created from history, who is advising the reader and myself as a scribe on how to craft this whole thing. This person is Winston Churchill. And he's engaged in some oratory about his idea of a Congress of the Global Mind. So let me just give you a little bit of that. He says, "The only way humanity can move forward is to see every human mind as a center of creative energy.
So good.
They must drop the categories that a more primitive mindware put in place. Remove the barriers that divide black, white, east, west, liberal, conservative, Protestant, Catholic, Jew, Arab, capitalist, socialist, management, labor. There's no place in the future for those paralyzing conflictual categories. While we hold to them, it's not a we future, but a them and us future. And some of us now have such power to wield against them that we can and we will bring everything crashing down around us. So there's his warning. Now here's his solution. I'm talking here of a Congress of the Global Mind, where the central task is creative, not defensive. We must build with the full energy of creative human minds, the best in the world. Build the vision of a new world order, leapfrogging over the calamitous inadequacy of past and current thinking. The change will come not because people choose to do so, but because they are being swept there by the force of mind at work in the world. The energy centers will be our visioneers, led there by the power let loose by this one grand enterprise for which we have been assembled. And after that comes the unfolding, a millennium of effort to achieve the vision. All right, so Churchill has this idea that you can collectively get the minds, individual minds, into a collective global mind that will change the world. And we are in the process through our Visioneers Network of creating our own Congress of the Global Mind. The way it's done in the book is to use these energy centers located in iconic spots around the world, like Machu Picchu and Mount Kilimanjaro, and to broadcast messages from these sites by satellite television, because that was the technology back in 1992. But since then, the internet has been invented. And now in 2020, we have this incredible connective power that can connect all the minds, not all, but can connect millions of minds in the world together. If we can figure out how to do it effectively. So with our Visioneers project, we are in the process now of doing what Jerry describes as the ingathering of our Visioneers. And they're coming in very quickly now, and incredibly creative and powerful people. And we're assembling them. And we've given ourselves another couple of years to October 2022 to gather the Visioneers and to design our own Congress of the Global Mind. We're not sure what it will look like. We have the idea that energy centers will emerge where the Visioneers are congregated, and that each one will be able to put up its own message to the world and illustrations of the power of creative thinking and so on. And that we can orchestrate it in such a way that it'll be a powerful collective voice to the world. Now, of course, we've got to be able to get the world to pay attention. And that's the task between now and then of how to do that. And events like this Up Convergence, of course, are a step in that direction, where people and organizations from around the world are coming together to give their voice, their collective voice. So we're in the process of doing this, and it's pretty exciting. I kind of find myself living in the middle of my own story here. I feel very humble about
Are you Mark Venture all grown up?
Yeah. Put on the ears. But I feel very humble about the way others are stepping forward, particularly my wife, Geraldine Schwartz, who is leading the action with her brilliant ideas of creating this virtual exposition to showcase the web of good work, and now creating a new masterworks emporium of the great works of our time to incorporate and make accessible the works being produced by the incredible visioneers in the network. And I firmly believe that we're being led forward, as I said before, by the creative energy in the universe itself. And our job is to act, to get things moving. My job 30 years ago was to write the book when I didn't know for sure that I could. Our job now is to act as what Jean Houston calls midwives of the future, to proclaim the triumph of human nobility in creating a wonderful future world.
Well, that feels like a pretty perfect way to end this interview. Thank you so much, Des. Actually, before we do, though, I think it would be very useful for you to tell us where we can find this book and be inspired by this story. So if you want to share with us.
Okay, well, the book is, as I said, 30 years old. But what we've done recently is a couple of things. One is that we've put the book out as an ebook on Amazon. So it is available there as an ebook. If you go searching for it, make sure you find the right one, because there are other titles out there using the word Visioneers. So make sure you find Visioneers, a courage story about belief in the future by Desmond Berghofer. So that's out there. I also have remaining print copies of the original edition, which may become a collector's piece, who knows. And if people would like one of those, they can write to me at desmond@thevisioneers.ca. desmond@thevisioneers.ca. And the other thing I should tell people is that when we first published the book in October 1992, Jerry had the idea that we should put it out in an audio version. And I said, what do you mean? This is a 500-page manuscript.
It's so something she would say. Oh my goodness.
Anyway, I sat down and I mind mapped 20 episodes, 20 30-minute episodes. And we found this fellow with his recording studio in his basement out in Surrey and Vancouver. And we, Jerry and I, made this, what we call this audio theater, in which we're interacting with each other and telling the story of the book and reading excerpts and so on. So we have that available. We originally put it out on audio cassettes. And would you believe, I still have one of the original boxes. There's 20 cassettes inside there, which you can pop into your cassette player and listen to at your leisure. However, we know the world has moved on from that technology. So we put it out as an MP3 digital file, and we have put that on our website at the visioneers.ca. And everyone who joins as a Visioneer is given a complimentary download of the audio theatre. And all you have to do is click and you can listen to it on your mobile device 30 minutes at a time. And so that's another way you can get access to the story.
Mm-hmm. And you and Jerry both do an incredible job of reenacting the characters. It really comes to life in the audio theater. So highly recommend that.
Yeah. Jerry and I play the male and female roles, and I do my Churchill impersonation, as I was just doing here.
Mm-hmm.
And it works. I think we had a real hoot making it.
Yeah.
Because we're doing it off the top of our heads, no script, just reading from mind maps and from the book.
Oh, wow. See, I wondered about that when I was listening to it, how much you had actually mapped it out, because it flows so perfectly through each scene and each section. I thought for sure you were reading off of a
Well, it was very spontaneous.
Wow. Amazing.
And it was all one take, We didn't have the time or the leisure or the money to make this perfect. We just did it in one take.
Well, you did phenomenally. I was actually listening to them just last night and this morning, and I was like, these are phenomenal. And I mean, I love the old the music in the background and the whole way it sets the scene. It's really quite brilliant.
Yeah, well, we left some of the old stuff on there, like our technician saying, "That's the end of side 1.
Yeah.
Please turn over the tape to go on to side 2."
I like it. He has
that on there so that people would have this sense of this old story being brought back at a time when it's so needed.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Desmond, for being here today and sharing with us this vision from your book. And I highly recommend to anyone listening to buy a copy of the book, and also to go to the website, which shares more about the network that Jerry and Des are building, thevisioneers.ca, and you can learn more about their work there, and join us in this visioneering mission. So thank you, Desmond.
It's been my pleasure, and thank you for this opportunity.